to know how to live the way God intended? Then this podcast series is tailor-made for you. David Taviner asks Bible expert Mike Beaumont why Jesus spoke about living God's way using parables. And Mike will sum up what this means for us today in just 3 words.
This time we're looking at Jesus' parable of the rich fool in Luke's Gospel, chapter 12. And it's been always helpful, Mike, with each of our conversations to get in our minds a sort of sense of where we are or who Jesus is talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he's still on this final journey from Galilee in the north to Judea in the south. He spent the last couple of years ministering in the villages and towns of Galilee, and now he's making his way to Jerusalem for what he knows will be the final time, for the climax of his ministry and the cross that awaits him there. But as he's making his way south towards Jerusalem through Judea, he's taking every opportunity that he can to preach God's message, to preach the good news of the kingdom. And as he does so, he continues to be dogged by, guess who? Yes, the scribes and the Pharisees. The scribes, the rabbis, those religious teachers and interpreters of the law, and the Pharisees, those people who sought to give themselves to keeping the law with every minute detail and all the additional laws that were added. And so much of what Jesus taught cut across what was so precious to them. And towards the end of chapter 11, he actually gets invited into the home of one of the Pharisees. So, open-hearted to him. But then the Pharisee is surprised that Jesus didn't wash his hands before the meal. Again, not hygiene, but ritual. And then that leads in chapter 11 to Jesus doing a pretty scathing expose of the Pharisees and their nitpicking desire to look after the micro detail of things while missing the whole point. And out of that, as he leaves the home at the end of chapter 11, when Jesus went outside, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law began to oppose him fiercely and to besiege him with questions, waiting to catch him in something he might say. So this is the atmosphere in which our story is set today. Meanwhile, chapter 12 begins. Meanwhile, when a crowd of many thousands had gathered.
Many thousands?
I know. That's incredible, isn't it? A crowd of many thousands had gathered, so they were trampling on one another. Jesus began to speak first to his disciples. So there's a huge crowd, but Jesus is addressing the disciples, but the crowd are overhearing. We'll hear in a moment. And what does he say? Well, what he says shows concern for his disciples. He starts by saying, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. So he teaches them to be so careful not to get that Pharisaic nitpicking spirit within themselves, but to resist it with all his might. And as he is teaching his disciples to beware of these Pharisees and these rabbis and their nitpicking requirements of keeping their laws in addition to the law, there's someone in the crowd, perhaps no doubt thinking, well, this is a good bloke. He's got his head screwed on. He's not in this for himself like this other lot is, suddenly chips in to ask Jesus a question to resolve an issue in the way that other rabbis often would do, because he thinks Jesus is clearly going to be on his side from all that he's heard with his attack against the Pharisees. Surely this is a bloke I can trust to get to speak up and say, here, listen, this guy's right.
And what question does he have?
Well, why don't we look from chapter 12 and verse 13? Someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. So there's a money problem in the family. Oh my goodness, that won't be the first or last time that has happened, will it? A dispute in family over money. And it looks like a father's died, the inheritance has been left, it ought to be shared up, and the brother's not done what he should have done. Teacher, Rabbi, tell my brother to divide the inheritance. Now, very common for rabbis to be called upon to make that sort of decision in those days.
So does Jesus answer his question?
Well, sort of, yes, but not in the way that he expected him to, because his question really shows that he's not been listening to Jesus' teaching, not to be like the Pharisees, not to be, money grabbing. The Pharisees were really well known for their love of money. Remember, being a Pharisee was a lifestyle, not a job. Most were middle class traders, merchants, fairly well off, and they were well known as being people who loved money. So this guy comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, resolve this family money dispute for us, will you, Rabbi?" And it's as if Jesus slaps his head and thinks, "Oh my goodness, have you just not been hearing what I've said about what the danger of money does?" And so he says to the man in verse 14, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, and he leaves it with that, "I'm not getting involved." Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." So a warning here out of this request is to say, look, the real issue is not the law or whether he's fulfilled it. The real issue is your heart, and the real issue is what's going on in your heart. And out of this, he's now going to tell them a parable about the dangers of greed. Now, Luke has an awful lot of interest in his gospel about the dangers of possessions, money, materialism. A lot of Jesus's parables in Luke focus on things like that. The parable of the shrewd manager and the rich man and Lazarus, and the parable of the 10 minas. But this is not just about money. This is about greed. This is about an insatiable desire for more. And so Jesus is now going to tell this parable in the context of this man saying, "Settle our money dispute, Jesus."
And this is what Jesus said. "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' Then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God.'" So this person in the crowd gets a parable.
Yeah, a whole parable to himself to answer his question. And as with all the other parables, it's the whole parable that is the answer to the situation. What's it about? Well, it's about what we would call, I suppose, a self-made man. He's successful, he's rich, he's got it through farming, he's had a fabulous yield that year, and his barns aren't big enough to get all the yield in. And so he thinks, what will I do? I'm going to have to pull down my barns and make even bigger barns. So this is a man, a self-made man, for whom enough is never enough. He's had this great harvest, got surplus grain, but now he wants more. Now, if that's not a challenge to us in the Western world today, I don't know what is, because it seems to me that's the basis of Western life. Look at advertising. You need more, you need better, you need a newer, you need a bigger, you need the latest. Replace what you've got. So he's a man who wants more and who builds these huge silo grains in place of the ones he's got. Interestingly enough, they found ruins of silo grains in Sepphoris, a town that you and I have been when we were recording our series, Jesus Then and Now. So this is the story. A man for whom enough is never enough. I think that in itself carries a challenge for us today, because I often have heard people say, if only I had a bit more. Well, how much is a bit? And how much would be enough for you to say that's it? Or would you keep pulling down your silo to build even bigger ones? So I think a very, very relevant parable still for us today.
But it sounds like Jesus hasn't answered the guy's question, because that was about inheritance.
Yeah. But what Jesus sees is, this is not really about inheritance. I think Jesus looked into his heart and saw there was an issue here. This is not about a legal issue of who's got the inheritance. He saw for this guy, in this context, the issue was the stuff, the money, the wanting more. And that's therefore what he goes to the heart of and challenge. He's, in the parable, understandably, he's a guy who wants to protect his future. I mean, whoever doesn't want to protect our future? But the interesting thing in the parable is when you dig deeper, he doesn't just want enough. He wants, quotes, I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the places you should have heard it is Isaiah chapter 22, where Jesus is quoting from where Isaiah berates the folly of wealthy Jews who are wanting constantly more. So he's a figure that many people in those days could have identified with, and I think still can identify with today. He wants to protect his future, but not just with enough. He wants to have enough to eat, drink, and be merry. This is not just enough for the basics of life. This is to put a cushion of comfort around him that will give him margin and that will give him room. And he thinks this is what life is all about.
And I noticed in this parable that this certain rich man does a lot of thinking himself and working it out just for himself.
Yes. Then he said, then he thought. And, God's not involved in it. Let's be very clear. God is not anti-money. God is not anti-stuff. God is not anti-wealth. Actually, there were plenty of wealthy people in the Bible. Abraham was a wealthy guy, measured with his flocks and his herds. Come to the New Testament, Lydia was a very successful businesswoman who dealt in high-end fashion. And, God never told any of them, hey, sell all this stuff and get rid of it. It's not the money or the wealth or the stuff per se. It's whether the money and the wealth and the stuff can make room for God or not. And of all the things in this life, one of the biggest things that can squeeze God out is a desire for more money, more stuff. And then when I've got enough, I'll make space for God. But this parable is saying, how much is enough? And how do you know you're going to be able to keep on pursuing that?
And just coming back to the words of this guy who says, take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. That view is as prevalent today as ever it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, enjoy life. And listen, God doesn't want us not to enjoy life. We get no brownie points for living a miserable life and think we're pleasing God by doing so. But this was the focus of his life. This was all he lived for. He ripped down barns and replaced them with bigger barns. Why? So that he could pursue this focus of his life, having more and more and more, for life to be easy and comfortable, and to be able to, eat, drink and be merry. Have a happy time. Have a happy life. Enjoy life. That was his only goal. And the trouble is, it was a goal that totally excluded God. God fits nowhere into this framework of his thinking. He is at the center of everything. His love for stuff, and yet more stuff, and an inability to think enough is enough, and there's no room for God. And so we get the twist in the story, as we so often do in these parables, don't we? And the twist comes in verse 20, but God. Oh my goodness, he shut God out. But God said to him, you fool. Oh my goodness, they're powerful words. You know, if we're the sort of person who's a stuff lover and for whom enough is never enough, and the pursuit of possessions and money and pleasure are our sole goal in life, God looks at you and says, you fool.
Never mind what the neighbour thinks.
Absolutely.
This is God saying you're a fool.
Absolutely. You fool. This very night, your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? Now, we don't get the end of the story, but clearly where the story is going, that guy was going to die that night. And then who was going to get all the stuff that had cluttered God out? Could he take all that stuff with him when he went? Absolutely not. When he went, he would go naked before God. And then what would he have to say? What would his answer be to God of why stuff and money and the desire for evermore had squashed God out? What would he then say to God when he appeared before him that day? But Jesus says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, not the for themselves there again, but is not rich towards God. There's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with stuff as long as it's kept in its right place, as long as it's used, yes, to bless us and our family and our friends, but also is released to bless God and God's work and God's kingdom. But if we are those who store up things for ourselves and aren't rich towards God, there's a day of reckoning coming, Jesus is saying. So he never answers the guy's appeal. Please settle this dispute. Make my brother give me my share. And Jesus sees through him and sees, this is not about a question of law. This is about a question of heart. I see right through you. I see that you are no different to these money-grabbing Pharisees whom you look down and sneer upon. And you are no different because you're a man for whom enough would never be enough. And I could tell your brother to do what was right, and it still wouldn't be enough for you.
And Jesus is talking about being rich toward God. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's an interesting phrase, that, isn't it? Rich towards God. I think it's making sure that we've invested in relationship with God, that we've got a rich relationship with God. We've spent time with God. Our heart is open to God. We love to talk to him and listen to him and read his word and above all, to do what he tells us to do. And secondly, I think rich towards God is rich towards the things and the people of God. Are we investing in the people of God and the kingdom of God with our wealth? Now let's go back to that rich lady, Lydia. She was a dealer in purple goods. That was the top-end fashion in those days, extremely expensive fabric. And so, she wouldn't have been without a shekel or two, without a doubt. And yet she used her money, not just for herself, but to further the purposes of the kingdom. So the first thing we know is the very first church in Philippi, where she was saved and where she came from, she opened up her home as the base of the church. She's not one of these people who say, oh, you know, my home is mine. I don't want other people coming in. She uses this, what would have been, I think, a pretty beautiful home, quite an extensive home. She's ready to open it up wide. There's no attitude here of, this is mine. It's rather, God, you've given me this. This is yours. I want to use it for you and your kingdom. We know that she used to travel for business. And we know that she used to use those travels as opportunities for the gospel and to support St. Paul and his apostolic team. So she sought to be rich towards God, both in a personal relationship, but in how she used her resources. And there was no sense of, like this man in the parable, it's mine, it's my barn. Let me pull it down and build myself an even bigger barn. So she was seeking to be rich towards God in relationship and towards God in terms of the support of his ministry and the expansion of his kingdom.
So Jesus has said what he needed to say to the man in the crowd. What does he go on to say?
Well, it's interesting. As so often, he takes an incident that happens and makes it a teaching point for his disciples. As the verses that follow then said, verse 22, then Jesus said to his disciples, so, hey guys, there's something I want you to learn out of this, because it would be really easy to sort of misinterpret what Jesus had said and to think, oh, so Jesus is anti-wealth, anti-money, anti-possessions, is he? Does he want me to sell everything up and live like a pauper and end up worrying like the poor? And what Jesus does is to lift their eyes to our big-hearted Father in heaven, who does not want us to love stuff, but who is well able to provide us with the stuff we need, as long as we are seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness. So actually, I think it's probably worth reading on to the verses that follow after this parable. And we read this. Then Jesus said to his disciples, Luke 12:22, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. The word means don't get anxious about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn like the man in the parable. Yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? So since you can't do this very little thing, add a single hour to your life, why worry about the rest? Hey, consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labour or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendour was dressed like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, O little of faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and all these things will be given to you as well. So Jesus is not being that heavenly minded, he's no earthly good. He's saying, hey, I know that you need clothes to wear and food to eat and a place to live. And so does your Father. and if he can feed the birds, and if he can clothe the flowers, and perhaps he's pointing to them as they're walking along, just look how beautiful they are. Look at the detail in that flower. Your God did that. Your Father in heaven did that. If God can do that for birds and flower and grass, do you not think he can provide for you? So here's the secret. Here's the secret. Here's what the Pharisees missed. Here's what that man in the crowd had missed. And it's simply this: seek first God's kingdom. Seek to make God and his rule number one, always, at all times, in all situations. And then when you do, all these things, what thing? All these practical things.
All this stuff.
All this stuff, all the needs of life, God is well able to provide you with what you need. So this is about focus and priority. The focus of the Pharisees was money. The focus of that guy in the crowd had been money. Neither of them had got their focus on God. And Jesus is taking this as a teaching opportunity out of the incident and out of the parable to say, listen, God is not uncaring about these practical details of life. God is not uncaring about that bill that arrived this week that you think, what on earth am I going to do with it? God is not uncaring that you didn't get that extra shift at work this week that you were so looking forward to. Listen, bring it to him. Literally, bring your bill. I've done this so many times, David. Spread bills out before God and say, God, I can't pay this. Can you see it? Can you look, please? And if you will seek first, not stuff, not money, not even how am I going to meet this, if you will seek first, God, be king in my life. Hey, God, here is an exciting opportunity for me to experience your kingly rule in this very practical solution. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And Jesus says, I tell you, God is well able to meet with all these practical things. Don't love stuff, love God. Don't pursue stuff, pursue God. And your God, who is the God of all stuff, is well able to provide you with all that you need when you do.
Bible expert Mike Beaumont explaining the parables of Jesus to David Taviner. Bible Parables in 30 Minutes is just one of a series of podcasts from Mike and David that help to make sense of the Bible, some of them recorded on location in the Holy Land and beyond. You can check them all out on the easy-to-use app UCB Player or wherever you listen to your podcasts.